All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Apologize for a little bit of a technical glitches this evening. So thanks for hanging out. We got a really interesting information going to come up tonight. So I want to introduce you to James Castleberry. He's a leadership consultant, executive coach, and emotional intelligence strategist with over 30 years of experience spanning military intelligence, organizational development, and adult learning. A retired U.S. Naval Intelligence Commander, James served in strategic training and leadership roles across NATO, U.S. Special Operations Command, and global intelligence teams before transitioning into healthcare leadership, development, and corporate consulting. Post-military career includes supporting hospital systems through the COVID-19 crisis, leading transformation initiatives at Booz Allen Hamilton, and launching Leader EI, a purpose-driven firm that equips leaders and teams with emotional intelligence tools to drive trust, clarity, and performance. And James, as a fellow Navy vet, I'm going to resist the jokes about naval intelligence. So I'm just going to leave it there. Thanks so much for being here, James. Appreciate you, and take it away.
All right. So thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it, and it's such an honor to be able to be here with the team today. And I think it's a very interesting topic that people have fun with. And so um, we'll go ahead and I will click through. Okay, so this is more about me, and Lee's done a fantastic job of the introduction. And so all I want to do is bring your eyes to the word cloud, because I think that if I put my bio in a word cloud and this is the output, and we're talking about organization, teams, and leadership, then it's very likely that I'm among friends in this webinar. Okay, I want to bring this up, and I've talked to folks about it, and you might not see this very often, but because we go through so many tools in this webinar, there's a lot of trademarks involved, and so I want to make sure that the folks who own these tools, disseminate these tools, sell these tools, and use these tools get their proper recognition for their trademarks, and that's what this slide is about. Okay, so we'll jump right in. And this will be participation all the way through. So if you could scan that, that's the quickest way to get there. And because we're talking about commonly used psychometric tools, I'd just like to learn from you what your MBTI letters are. If you don't have MBTI letters, that's fine. We'll test that QR code, and you could just put NA. ENTJ, INTJ, this one. All right, I think, all right, more coming in. How many folks, y'all, do we have in the webinar right now?
There's 12 total.
12? Okay. So I was just trying to judge. I like the that's a different level of awareness, that I/E STJ on the screen, and that situational dependent, and so that's interesting. And so we've got 12 folks in. I'll wait for a few more to come in. Or NA. All right, and I'll apologize now if you didn't realize this was going to be a participation event. I think if nothing else, it demonstrates our familiarity with this specific tool. And there may be people, if you start talking in research circles, who will resist using these letters at all. So I like how large we have the INTJ and ENTJ, and that seems to be pretty popular. A lot of N's, and in MBTI they go through these descriptions that put you into these categories, and largely used for helping with communication. So thank you. I appreciate your participation. And so what this is really about is that in the workplace, our folks have already invested in specific tools that are there. What I would do is say that there are some that are more appropriate for specific uses based on validity and reliability. And so the purpose of this is to go through some of the commonly used tools and try to help people understand the appropriate use for the tools. Because it could be that for the purpose that you need, you may need to invest in another one or use a different approach than some sort of psychometric tool. And what we really want to avoid is not selecting the right tool and then everyone choosing something that will work in a lot of places but not very well. Okay, so let's talk about this. You won't find in anything from APA, you won't find psychometric tool. What you'll find is psychometric test. And so, if you could please answer these questions in this poll, I'd appreciate that. As we try to understand how well the audience understands the definition of a psychometric test. All right, so we've had one person answer. Or maybe we had multiple people that selected the same one. I'm not sure. There we go. So 17% there. Now 14, 71 there. Okay. It's interesting because I believe some of these changes, they actually represent changes. Um, um, okay, we won't belabor this much longer. The 56% going to item B. And that will be right. So a standardized instrument, scale, self-report to measure mental or behavioral attributes, attitudes, emotional functioning, intelligence, or personality. And so we find from APA that it is a fairly broad definition. Okay, so as we look at these, and there's examples across the screen for you to take a look at with Clifton Strengths and then EQI 16 Personalities DISC, VIA, Mesquite, FIRO, and then MBTI all the way on the right. So are these, based on that definition, are these psychometric tools? And so I would say yes, based on that definition from APA, they are psychometric tests. Okay, so before we go on, because they're classified differently, I wanted to ask this question and go through this a little bit because you'll see these in charts as we cover the different tools. The APA definition of psychometric tool level, and you'll see a question mark there. So an A-level psychometric is that it requires an informal training. B level is that you have to be certified to be able to issue it. And then C level, you're getting a little bit deeper. You actually have to have a specific education in the field and license to be able to use a C level tool. And so the reason that there's a question mark up at the top is that APA doesn't define these different levels. They were actually defined by the test publishers. So the people that produce these different tools came together. Now, what you will find is that in ethics, the APA has agreed to these definitions, and so there's some concurrence there. But it wasn't an APA definition; it was the actual test publishers that came up with these different levels. Okay, so we'll talk about some common misconceptions about psychometric tools. And so, with the help of folks in the chat room, if you could enter some of the things that some of the common misconceptions about psychometric tools, and we'll take a look at a few of those. And if y'all could help me as they come in.
So the first one in James is concrete facts are provided.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What was the other one?
That's the, oh, there it is. You locked into one category for your lifetime.
Interesting. And so that would correlate to the personality type indicators like MBTI, like DISC. One size
And
fits all.
yep, one size fits all.
Yeah, and so all of those are within these that we'll go through, and so I appreciate that. Thank you. Pe People are skeptical. Yeah. Um, Even if they're valid and reliable, people are skeptical. With self-assessments, it can even be more of a challenge where people are skeptical. So, are they valid for hiring? Let's take it straight to industrial organizational psychology and uses. So, are they valid for hiring? Um, and so, where we have to be careful and take a look at validity and reliability is that if they're not valid tools, there could be ethical and legal challenges with those. And if it's a popular tool, it must be scientifically sound. If it's out there, people are using it. Your organization historically has invested in it, so it's the tool that you have. Then it must be scientifically sound. And I think in this audience that becomes a simple answer. So absolutely not. Popularity does not equate to scientific credibility. This could be debatable in dissertations. Self-report equals objective measurement, and there's even discussion out there that people debate quantitative and qualitative analysis and whether or not they're able to use self-assessments and Likert scales for quantitative analysis. Some would debate no, some would debate yes. But they are, regardless, they are vulnerable to response bias. If they're a self-assessment, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not valid and they're not reliable, but they are subject to response bias. And then a certification. And so what I would say about this, being certified in a few, is that um, if there's a certification tied to it, it doesn't mean that it's been validated. It doesn't mean that it's reliable. It doesn't mean that it's valid. It doesn't mean that there's empirical research to support anything that it would come out with. And psychometric tools replace interviews or performance reviews. Absolutely not. They can be additive if they are valid and reliable, but they should never replace interviews or performance reviews. Okay, any questions on this at all? Okay, so now we've looked through the lens of APA and their definition of what a psychometric test was, and it was kind of broad. But now if we look at PSYOP guidelines, are they valid psychometric tools for what PSYOP and APA concurred with in 2018 as high stakes tools? You can use them to make high stakes decisions, promotions, and hiring and those type of things. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so here's another question. How confident are you in understanding whether a psychometric tool is reliable and valid? And Slido lets you choose a pace for this one. So it's more of a comfort level than it is a number. Yeah, some in the middle, some on the higher. Some maybe we never considered if we're using a certain tool. Maybe we never considered the validity or reliability of a specific psychometric test or tool. It's perfectly valid. You show up in an organization. This is what they're using. You're either IOOD or thrown into a training development department, or you're consulting, and this is what they use. And they can even tell you they've been using it for years in their development programs. And so, do we understand the true? If you haven't done the research yet, do you understand the reliability and validity? And so, people are smiling. They're not in love with their knowledge, but they're smiling. I'll take that. Score overall 3.9. Okay, so let's talk about reliability and how consistent is the tool um, over time across items among raters. Is it reliable? And pretty much the standard that is used across these tools is Cronbach's alpha. So for internal consistency. And so is it internally? Do the items on the test measure the same construct? Will the same person get similar scores? And now I want you to think of these that are lined up on the screen and the different results you may have had over the years or not as we think about reliability and validity. Do different evaluators produce the similar results? And so because we talk about this, and I think people aren't that familiar with his face, I want to give Dr. Cronbach some credit here. And when you see Cronbach's alpha, which is the standard that's used, he is the guy that came up with it. And you'll see it expressed, the equation for this, for reliability, based on what they're assessing, expressed in like 3 different ways. But some people hadn't seen his face. We want to pay tribute to his legacy because it's used so much in reliability. Okay, so when we talk validity, so how it measures a specific psychological trait or construct that it's intended to assess. Validity is about the intention. And then when we talk about selecting a specific tool, what are we measuring? What is it that we're trying to learn from the tool? And that's where we come back to validity, is that it'll have a stated purpose, a stated intent. Does it measure that? And how well does it measure that? Um, okay. So for it to be valid, it has to measure what it claims to measure. For it to be reliable, um, internal consistencies, that little A there refers to Dr. Cronbach's alpha. You'll see it expressed that way. For high stakes decisions, and this goes back to the PSYOP guidance about what a high stake decision is. And then the different levels there is the trained usage. And so you'll see that in the different charts as we go through. And so when we look into making personnel decisions in our workplace environments, this chart is pretty good to think about. And these terms come directly from the guidance that's actually from 2018 that PSYOP wrote, and then the APA concurred with in selection and promotion. And so, your eyes are immediately drawn to termination and compensation decisions because there's no valid tool for termination or even influencing pay. If anyone has any questions, I can address those now. None heard? Okay. So now we may look at this through a different lens, the PSYOP lens, as to whether they're valid, reliable, or psychometric tools that we can use in the workplace. So here is a common one that we've seen. And remember, the internal consistency for reliability was at Cronbach's alpha. And so I keep that in green throughout these slides because you can compare it directly to the reliability category that we have here. And so based on the PSYOP characterization of what's valid and reliable and can be used in high stakes decisions is Clifton Strengths, something that you would use in that. It's great for the highlighted uses, best use cases, strengths-based coaching, leadership development, team building, but could it be used in making decisions based on reliability and validity? And you wouldn't want to use it based on the reliability. Um, and then also the limited predictive validity. One of the challenges with Gallup Strengths too is that it is, like I said, outstanding for team building. We're actually going to do an exercise with it. I think it's good for self-awareness, but based on what's been released from Gallup and the research that's been released, it would struggle to be able to be used as a tool for high stakes decisions. Okay, so here's an example of the 34 categories, and these are characterized by their different themes. Those of you, well, first I'd like to ask in the chat, are there people that are Gallup Strengths certified coaches at all with us? Oh, first you're hearing about it. Okay. Well, it is an interesting tool. And so I like to do an exercise with this. And so if you'll bear with me, we'll go through an exercise I think is pretty enlightening for folks. And you would get these results, and you'll have your top 5, your top 3 from these. But what I'm going to do in this exercise, I'll allow you to just think about which of these you can relate to the most. And we'll go ahead, and if you could write down don't put it in the chat, but if you could make note of your top 5 strengths, if you look at this chart, where you think you would fall out. And then this falls into the self-assessment category, right? So you're looking at these charts, these names, and writing down what you believe your top 5 strengths are. I'll give folks a few minutes to do that. And if you're not familiar with Gallup Strengths, it is very interesting. It was one of the first things I was coached with a coach that I was getting help from, and I love in influencing. I love the woo characterization. I've always found that pretty fun. How much woo do you have? And you'll hear people when they talk about Gallup Strengths that you're using your activator, or you're using your ideation, or you're using your whatever. Okay, so if I can just get a thumbs up in the chat, do we have our 5 strengths written down? All right. Now we've got those. Oh, good to go. A lot of thumbs up. Appreciate it, y'all. So now, out of those 5, take and circle your top 3. The ones that you think you relate to the most, the ones that would show up for you. Okay, and there's some debate. They'll be close, and people have different opinions of how they might show up. And this is an exercise that a Gallup Strengths coach actually shared with me. I thought it was pretty interesting. So if you've got your top 3, now what I want you to do is to consider the importance of those things. And these sometimes fall into what your values really are. Your strengths and your values are closely related. And so if you think of your top 3 that you've circled, now I want you to place yourself in a position of a supervisor, and someone comes in that's an employee, you're doing a performance review, or you're supporting people doing performance reviews, then picture that person um, kind of being the opposite of what those 3 strengths, those things that you value most, the things that you're strongest in. And so what this can reveal is that these are the areas where we'll most be triggered. And so that type of awareness, what's most dear to you, if someone's the opposite of that, if you're an executing achiever and achievement's very important to you, and someone's kind of laid back, they're not really worried about it, they just come in, they punch the clock, then you might be triggered by some of those things. Maybe you perceive that as a lack of initiative, right? And so positivity, if you're in relationship building and positivity is one of yours, and you've got someone that comes in and they have a dark cloud over their head all the time, these people are going to be right in your trigger zone. So it's very important to acknowledge this. And now I want you to think about it as you leave the webinar, as you leave this evening. If there are people in your life that you think that you're becoming aggravated with, that think that you have communication challenges with, you just don't understand them that much, it could be that they're triggering you because they are the opposite of what you value most. And so that type of awareness is just really important for our own self-regulation. Any questions about that? Can you relate to that? Can I get a thumbs up for that resonates? All right, great. Okay, we will move on. And so I like to ask this question: Are you are you triggered by someone who doesn't share these strengths? And I think most of us are. So that's a valid use, right, for Gallup strengths. So now we move to EQI, and we're remembering, if we're evaluating it for a psychometric tool, that we're looking at the reliability and the validity of these, and we see that's B level, so it requires certification to administer, and whether or not this could be used. And so maybe thumbs up or thumbs down would help with this one if you think it could be used in hiring decisions, promotion decisions, those high stakes decisions that we talked about. Thumbs up or thumbs down. All right. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Pam. All right. So absolutely, based on the high reliability, internal consistency, Cronbach's alpha, and the validity content criterion, I do know a little bit. Admittedly, I do know a little bit more about EQI. One of the great things to ask about these tools too is what the norm is, and then was the norm representative of the overall population, right? So it's a good question to ask. But based on its space and reliability and validity, then EQI 2.0 is reliable and valid, based on reliable and valid for making high stakes decisions. Okay, 16 personalities. Now, when we're talking about a budget, because you can access this for free, 16 personalities is used a lot. One of my first coaches uses 16 personalities too. And so we'll take a look at the validity of that, the reliability of that. And it doesn't take very long to come to the conclusion that this free test may be great for informal coaching, team discussions, but you wouldn't want to use it in high stakes decision making. Okay, now there's a lot of emotion tied up in DISC, right? There's some. I spoke to a nonprofit that I was trying to help here in the Jacksonville area, and said, hey, I could come over and we could do EQI and help out the veterans that were going through the program. And she quite simply told me that DISC was a part of the fabric of her organization. Okay, all right, great. I could have done the same with this that we did with MBTI, right? So many of us know our DISC letters. I know that I'm DI, and we could have had the same thing, but it struggles with validity, right? If you're going to use it for high stakes decisions, it struggles with validity. So this would not be one that you would select for that. And so I hope as we go along, you're starting to see, okay, how do we judge these? Well, we judge them by the PSYOP guidance that APA's concurred with related to reliability and validity for high stakes decisions. And so hopefully we'll get better at looking at those and making those decisions. And if nothing else out of the webinar, you question that whenever you think about using a tool or using it for the intended purpose. Is it valid? Is it reliable for what we're trying to measure? Biaser. This is another one that was used with me. What your strengths are, and now because I have the knowledge of Gallup strengths too, it's like I want to go back and look at my bias stuff just to see, all right, is someone in my trigger zone because of something that I value in VIA. And so we'll take a look at reliability and validity. And it suffers a little bit too. So that would not be one that we would use for high stakes decisions. Mesquite 2. This is fairly new. You might not be familiar with Mesquite 2. Mesquite 2 just came out earlier this year, but Mesquite itself, and it's Myers-Salivey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test, is an abilities-based test, and it's actually an objective measure. Where even for my own tool, EQI 2.0, it's a self-assessment that's trait-based. And it's really good. It's reliable, consistent for what it's measuring. But this is an objective one. To get an objective picture, sometimes you have to go to 360 so that you can hear from supervisors and peers and subordinates. So if you look at this, you can come to the conclusion that it would be able to be used. Strong construct validity, not confounded by personality or bias. It kind of is what it is, and it's based on the way that the assessment is put together. Okay, 5OB. I wasn't very familiar with this one, but it came up as one that people have used. Anyone used FIRO before? Okay. Well, in such an educated audience, I'm always concerned. I'm going to say something that's out of alignment with what they believe about their tool, and so I wanted to ask about this one. And so, what were the responses? I missed them in the chat.
People just mentioned that they haven't seen this one before.
Yep.
Oh, okay, all right. And but it can be right if you look at acceptable and again, there's levels, right? So the wording you'll see is a little bit different here, but internal consistency, yeah, pretty good. You would want 80 and above, but because it says 0.77 to 88, that's good internal consistency. But it says acceptable construct and criterion related validity. What that means is that some of them, some of the things I looked at were not that valid. So there's parts of it that were and the parts that were not. And so then that would place the responsibility on us to make sure we knew what we were measuring, right? So team effectiveness, interpersonal awareness, most everything can be used in that capacity if you think about it. Okay, and now we've come full circle back to MBTI. And a lot of people still use MBTI. A lot of people are certified in MBTI. And for years and years, it was the primary tool that we saw and that we used. And so it can be outstanding for raising self-awareness. I think that it's outstanding in starting a conversation about how you react to one another. Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? Things that people have never considered before and how that might influence the way they communicate. But if you look at reliability and validity, you'd be hard pressed to select this as a tool that you would use as a high stakes tool based on those. Okay, so are they IO psychology psychometric tools? And I think that's an incomplete question because the question is, are they really a tool that exhibits enough validity and reliability for you to use it in high stakes decisions. And so this is a reminder here, and I want to give folks, because the next thing we do is we actually go through some so that you can make decisions on whether or not you believe they could be used in this capacity. So if you want to take a look at those: selection, promotion, certification, placement, succession planning, and then safety critical roles, which I thought was interesting. Never for termination or compensation decisions. Okay. Okay. So Hogan personality inventory, right? Popular. I know a lot of executive coaches that use Hogan, swear by it. And so based on what you're seeing here, just say yes or no for use for high stakes decisions based on PSYOP guidance in the chat. Yeah, thumbs up works too. Thank you. Yes, yes. What else? Only heard of the name. Yeah, so what we can do, even if it's new to us, is we can take a look at the reliability and the validity of it and then compare it to internal consistency and what we know of reliability. Because you may not have seen a tool before, and you're in the position to select one to use with your organization for a leader development program or for orientation or onboarding. And so the focus for that to help us would be to look at reliability and validity. And those who answered yes and thumbs up, absolutely. For reliability, internal consistency, test retest. And so it's good for reliability. And then validity, strong construct. And so the Hogan personality inventory, I have a friend that's an executive coach here in Jacksonville like that. Okay, and here's another one, and I don't know whether you've heard of it or not. These 5 domains measures the big 5. If you hear psychologists talking about that in relation to personality, it's kind of the standard, the big 5. All right, watching the chat, seeing the affirmative responses, and absolutely high stakes decisions. A great tool. Okay. Now, this may be another one that you haven't heard of, and but I just found it interesting. Some of these tools are very interesting to read, just to see what they measure and what they may be able to provide. And so take a look at reliability and validity, and then provide an answer in the chat. I actually like with this one the "it depends" response. I will tell you that if the data that's associated with making these reliability and validity decisions is not published and it's proprietary, it makes it very difficult to support it as a valid tool. And you probably don't want to take the risk of using it for that purpose, right? If you think about it, that you could run into legal and ethical issues. And so some of them do suffer that. Some of the producers don't release their data. Doesn't mean it's invalid. It means I don't know. And so for this one, it doesn't quite meet it, but I like that it depends because it could be, there could be items that are valid, right? There could be portions that are valid, and that could be with any assessment. But overall, I wouldn't select it. I wouldn't use it for selection or promotion, placement, those types of things, without having visibility on empirical data. That makes sense. Okay, so we've talked through quite a few of these, some of the common tools, some of the ones that we haven't seen before. You've had the opportunity to take a look at validity, reliability, the definition of what psychometric tests and tools are. And so now let's get into Slido again and then grade your confidence in this. So, do you understand what you would use to select a tool for a specified purpose? And I get a better norm if more people respond. And you also give me the opportunity, gang, and I appreciate it, to fulfill my pre-test and post-test requirements of an adult educator. So I really appreciate that. And good. We had a little bit of formative, and now we get some summative evaluation along the way. All right, so some are out of 5, and then some are out of 4, and so that'll be something I can go back and compare to the actual first slide and see how far we've come. I think there were some that were lower than 4, and so I'll take it. Appreciate your participation in that. And so that's kind of what I have as far as the presentation, just reviewing those, discussing what psychometric tools are, discussing validity, reliability, and how you would use that to select a tool for high stakes decisions based on PSYOP guidance. And so I hope that was an interesting exercise for you. And now we could move into any questions that you may have.
Feel free to put your questions in the chat, or if you're open to, going off mute and asking questions that way, go ahead and raise your hand and get your answers questioned or questions answered.
Or just discuss it. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Nika.
Hi, I'm Anika Norman Gordon. So not a question per se, but basically a thank you for having this. It does my little academic IO heart good being a practitioner. And so really getting to activate those neurons that have been closed since I graduated from grad school in 2004. So it's really good. I definitely feel much more prepared to kind of bring the theory into practice. So thank you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it. If it just causes us to pause and think about it, right, when we're selecting these tools and how we're going to use them, I think we've done a decent job of reviewing these. And I'm not critical of any of the tools. We have corporations, companies, we have invested in these, and I think there's uses for them. Kim?
There's a question in the chat after Kim.
Oh, go ahead. We can do the chat question quick.
All right. So the question in the chat, James, is could you comment about how you explain options and choices to the executives?
Yeah, I think we struggle sometimes with buy-in, especially if there's expense involved. And so I think it boils down. I don't know that it'd be beneficial to go into valid and reliable. I think it would be, it might be, and you can tell me what better way is there to discuss it with leadership. I understand that's the question that you're asking. And so I think it boils down to what you've seen, their trust in you, what you've seen to be the most effective. Because some they're great for awareness, they're great for communication. Someone asked me what problem I solve. The problem I solve is with clarity, because I think we raise awareness with clarity. We understand our strengths and weaknesses, and we can go after those. But for selling it to leadership, we try to communicate this and sometimes struggle. And so you have a supportive, I think if you can explain well enough the ROI with internal promotions and retention, And the loss of time that you have in replacing someone and the spool up time, and you can communicate that. It's always a good argument for us because it comes down to dollars and cents so you can take to the CFO. But explaining purchasing a tool, that may be difficult. But I think if you're in a position to be selecting a tool, it's likely that your senior leadership is supporting some sort of program that you're developing. And what I would say is you can talk to them about the outcomes. And if they buy in on the outcomes, then you can talk about the cost of whatever tool that you're going to use successfully. Does that make sense?
They said yes, thank you.
Okay. And Lee and Pam, when you've been in organizations that have this challenge, how have you seen that approached based on the question? Or
From
anybody?
my perspective, I've seen DISC used, and it's been more of a localized department leader that's, gotten on a particular bandwagon. When I've dived a little bit deeper and gotten the snowball effect direct from C-suite, we were building competencies based on how we wanted to see leadership based off of, and then individual contributor. And so that was really interesting that we went to create our own. But I really haven't dived into or experienced much to where this, execs really supported a lot of these types of assessments.
If HR, if because a lot of training development IO people work within HR, we're placed there. If we're doing our job, then we've already communicated to the C-suite the advantages of doing this. And if you've got that buy-in, then you can create this direct line. You create the line from whatever that strategic objective is to the performance objectives, and then you've got justification for the tool to use. And that's where I've seen that be pretty successful. And you, like you said, you may create your own tool. And that's why you hire PhDs to do that, right? Anybody else?
Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah. So, given the advances in AI and big data, where do you see psychometric tools headed within the next decade or so?
I can tell you that the same guidance we had from 2018, they've used some of the same information in a document, and I can pass it, but a document on AI selection. And so there's actually a standard now by PSYOP that discusses using AI for selection. And so I think it's going to correlate to how comfortable organizations are overall with AI. And so we do have a standard. It talks about how to use AI. So I would use that as the kind of the guidebook for implementation. I don't think it will ever be able to do that and replace interviews. I don't think that performance will ever be thrown out the window. I think the people in the loop will continue, and even on to 10 years, it may be popular. They may find it as efficient to spend the money on AIs to help out. But there are aspects that you get for company fit and how they perform in a group. And there are certain questions that because of self-assessment and because of our own biases, they're not going to get the data, I don't believe, without having some sort of qualitative interviews. So that's the way I see it. So I see there could be a merger, but I see that AI might spit out after reviewing qualifications or reviewing something that's filled out that they'll have, these are your top 5 and these are your, top 10. And then you still have to hold interviews based on the human in the loop and making that real decision.
Thank you.
There's another one that came in. I'm just getting to the meat and potatoes. So there's a preface to arguing going online about psychometrics and very little agreement. And recently, she's seen people saying the Big Five isn't valid. What's your thoughts on that one?
We always take it back to data, and as you know, like you mentioned too, there are some people, Pam, that have an affinity to a certain tool. There are psychologists that were raised using Big Five, and they see it that way. But I think we're all we're driven with the purpose to do what's right. That when provided, we're analytical enough. If we're provided new information, that we can change. And what I would add to that is, if we're learning this and discovering it ourselves, I think that it gives us a little bit of relief, because if we're just learning it, then it's going to be difficult for the legal system to be that far ahead of us, so that we would be held accountable in that space. So as long as we're open to new data, we're open to new empirical research, then I think we're going to be okay. And yeah, there's going to be challenges, and it's even tougher with some of the producers of these psychometric tools that don't release their data, saying that it's proprietary.
I've talked to a organization that is in that very same spot, and so it's tough to really read through their white papers talking about their results without seeing more information, and it kind of just has that doubt of do I want to work further with them to go through all their certification process.
In our field, if we're not presented with the data, and we can't in our mind connect that there may not be bias involved, it's going to be very difficult for us to accept.
So there's another question in here, James, and Rich, I may need you to kind of help explain a little bit more. So Rich has got a question. NeoPi measures only Neo, not C or A, and then why? And I'm not familiar with Neo, so I
am not that familiar myself, and so I would hesitate to go.
Yeah. Well,
dive
it's
that
so
deep.
so if you look at the ocean, right, which is openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, the Neo personality inventory only measures, as I understand it, they only measure the neuroticism, extroversion, and openness traits, which is strange to me, because I've heard that like conscientiousness and maybe not agreeableness as much, but a conscientiousness is a big factor in the success of managers, for instance, right? Or certain other specialties, right? So I just thought it was interesting that this instrument that we say is very reliable for high stakes decision making omits arguably a pretty important thing, in my opinion, right, of conscientiousness.
No, so Rich, what I would do is I'd roll that back, right? So
Yeah.
validity is tied to what it's measuring.
Right.
Reliability is how frequently it will retest. And so I would take, if you want to use that tool, and if someone's all in on that tool, then you look specifically at what it's valid and reliable to measure based on the trait that you're looking for selection or placement or promotion, right? And so we actually, I think we get a little bit of discretion in how we're doing that. And I think that'd probably be the safest way to go, is just based on what it's valid for, the specific traits that we're looking for. Is it valid and reliable for those traits? And because then you'll have the data to support that it measures what you're looking for in a manager and a supervisor.
All right. So it's not selection. It's not an umbrella selection tool of everything. It's by the application of
Yeah,
what you're
that's the
intending.
validity of it. And I would
Right, yeah.
I'd say that for
Got it.
any of these. Right?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Rich. Let's see. So a little bit of a hard question from Ashlyn, she says, but essentially it comes down to, do you have a bit of a favorite depending upon the purpose of
Well, it's not hard for me at
what
all.
you're
If
trying to
I turn
achieve?
this into my own marketing, it's not hard for me at all. So yeah, I absolutely have a preference, because I'm certified to train people in EQI. And so that's my preference. And it's based on my experience in using it as a practitioner, not as a trainer, but as a practitioner through COVID and healthcare. And it has 5 composites and 15 subscales. So you're able to really break down these elements of emotional intelligence and then coach specifically development and strategies in those areas. And so I'm unapologetic about saying which ones are my favorite. But I would also challenge you, make sure that it's used for the purpose that you need it for. Make sure that it's valid and reliable for the purpose that you need it for. If it's leadership development, I love the tool. I've used it in cohorts and seen it used to great effect during COVID and some really challenging times. And then behind that is Mesquite, because it's been so valid in research for years, but now they've rewickered the presentation of the data. They haven't changed the data, but how it's presented in Mesquite too as an objective assessment. And sometimes we had to use 360s to get to that kind of objectivity before, but because this is not a trait-based, but an abilities-based test, Mesquite 2, if you can get a hold of it, I can give it to you. I'm a practitioner, but it's abilities based. And so I will say, in an unbiased fashion, review all of these for the intended purpose and what you want to get out of them. If I throw in a bias, then I absolutely want to use the ones that I believe in, that I'm certified in.
Anika's got another question, and you may have to help me out here, Anika, what SDI is, not unless you know what that is off the top of your head, James.
The strength deployment inventory. We've used it in Tennessee for like leadership and even some team coaching for them to kind of know how to better communicate amongst themselves. And so I was just wondering.
And so I would ask if you've researched the validity and reliability. Sometimes we fall into tools that our organizations have already invested in, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this, to help out, is that we need to be asking questions about what the intention is, and then even within the tools, are they valid and reliable for measuring specific traits that we want to use in high stakes selections, whether it's for promotion or placement. So I'm not that familiar with that one, sorry.
No problem. Thank you. So our big Department of Human Resources, they had kind of, I guess, blessed it initially, but it is worth, doing one's own research, which I have not done, full disclosure, to check that what we're using it for, it actually meets the thresholds and, for recommended.
And what I would do is caution with that too, is that if they've been using it for the wrong purpose for a long time, they may not be very receptive. And so I would face that with as much tact as you could muster if you do discover that.
Right. We'll
Rich,
just
go
recommend
ahead.
our agency take a
Sorry.
pivot.
I'm sorry, Nika.
Go ahead, Anika. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was just saying that if that was to be found, just kind of quietly pivot. Yes. And
Well,
work.
right, quietly pivot with as much tact as possible, and then I would go straight to the outcomes, right? And I would base that on my argument to do the quiet pivot is as we're budgeting for next year, this is what the intended use is for this. This is what the intended use is for this. It's valid and reliable for measuring these things and helping in these areas. This one might not be as good, but here's the outcome of this one, and you either see it or you don't. So it's just if the data is available to evaluate. Rich, or if someone else is in the chat.
Go ahead, Rich.
I was just going to say that one assessment, I don't think we saw this in here, but one assessment that's used frequently is the PI, predictive index. And, that's certainly come up as being highly valid and highly reliable. And I can see that. However, I will also tell you that I've also seen some executives or managers exclude people because, you're an operator, specifically in my case, and we're really looking for somebody who is this other label, with the person who is interpreting the results, the hiring manager or the person who's holding the purse strings, the executive, making the decision maybe without the competency. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does, and I'm not sure which type of psychometric it is. If it's a level, B level, C level, so probably a B level. It's are they
Yeah.
trained to do that, or are they just reading the output of a report? And then the other thing too is that it may be predictive in specific ways. It may be valid, reliable for those. But then you look at someone's performance, and then you talk about the contributions to the team and where you see them going. And it should be one input. David Crusoe for Mesquite shared with us that he uses it to help with succession planning. And an example that he provided was that they used it for someone that was going to be for selection for a CEO position. And because it's abilities based, it was to raise awareness. He said, I'm not going to tell you to make the decision solely on the tool. But use it as an input where this person, it might be good if you're speaking to a board, especially for a CEO, that they could use help in coaching in this area. Is something they need to be aware of. And there's somewhere he's made a recommendation that that's probably not a good selection. They chose to anyway. And that's the way of it. They get to make the decision. So same with PI. Why I don't think I would want to use any of these tools solely to do this. Can it be ethically if it's valid and reliable and legally? Yeah. But I wouldn't use it as a sole decision maker. I wouldn't take any one trait from one of these psychometrics and say, yeah, the person can get the job or not based on this. Now, if they make that decision, that's obviously their call. But
So that is actually a pretty good segue to Arlene's question. Do you want to hop on, Arlene, and
Sure.
ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned earlier that certain assessments are specific for certain areas, such as like Gallup, StrengthsFinder, for more of an individual basis.
Mhm.
My question is, do you recommend to pair certain assessments with each other? I know they are all built individually and not necessarily to complement, but given your experience, do you have a preference, or have you seen just how well each of them play with each other?
it, you know, there's value, right? There's value in knowing your strengths, like we had the exercise, and knowing where you may be triggered. And so raising awareness, MBTI, it's great for, it's just for my own conscience, and so that I wouldn't get into any type of, malpractice for our field. I wouldn't. I would really look to those that are valid and reliable for what we're trying to do, and it would always come back to that. MBTI is great for raising awareness, and I think it has its purpose. And I wouldn't criticize. I don't criticize any of them because they're all valuable for the most part in raising awareness. And I think that's even for the highly valid and reliable ones, that's going to be the basis of those assessments, is providing that clarity. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And then how can we, what there are differences though, Arlene, and I'll tell you, like the personality type indicators will tend to say you are this, or even with Gallup Strengths, work in these areas of your strength. And so I like the ones that will go into what your strengths are, and then what your challenges or focus areas may need to be, so that you work toward developing those areas as well. Sustain those where you're strong, but work in those areas for development. And so automatically that starts to paint this picture of certain tools are better for development, and some are better for raising awareness and communication. And again, it's hard for me not to be biased for the tools that I've used and seen. So a lot of it depends on budget. A lot of it depends on what's already been invested in, how much it's going to cost. And then the hidden cost is, if you're certified in a certain tool, one of the hidden costs could be how much you have to pay, or your organization has to pay for the individual assessments. Because you've gotten past the gatekeeping of being certified in something, but if you have to pay for an assessment, and I'll use the example without the name, Pam, but if you have to pay $500, is your organization ready to use that assessment that you're now qualified in? Are they going to invest that, depending on the size of a leader development group or an onboarding group that you have? Are they willing to invest that kind of money? Even if they will invest in your certification, are they willing to invest in how much it costs per assessment? It's kind of a hidden cost. It's a great question to ask.
Yeah, that's a big valid point, and Anika made that comment in the chat a little bit ago, that okay, what are all the different costs for the assessments, get certification and so forth, and it becomes part of figuring out which one you want to go use, as you've mentioned.
And the best way to do that is to find someone that's a current practitioner. The organizations themselves, we do a great job of saying our certification costs this much. So I can come and train you in EQI 2.0, the certification, 16 hours, 2 days, whatever, costs this much money, and you pay that. But before people are certified, we don't often know how much the individual assessments cost. And it's kind of a hidden cost that we need to think about for individual report. How much of an investment are we serious about leadership development? Are we going to, based on a strategic objective tied to specific development goals, are we going to tie to not only the certification of the practitioner, but then also the assessments once they're certified, based on the size of the cohort?
Yep. So that's all there is so far for questions in the chat. Is there anything that comes to mind here at the end? Otherwise, we're definitely at time, so we want to respect people's extra time that they've given in hanging out for James to join us.
Sorry, apologies.
So
My own self-regulation was challenged. I can tell you that, with the frustration of rebooting and getting logged in.
Yeah. So I just want to take a second and say, thank you so much, James, for coming and sharing with us. I found it very enlightening personally, and I really appreciate everyone. Thank you for coming to join us for this. As you log out of Zoom, it will open a browser window with a survey. We do ask that you take that because that helps us to give you better value so that we can bring in speakers and topics that you're interested in learning about. Because that's what this is ultimately about, is what all of you would like to learn. So again, thanks, James. Any parting thoughts you'd like to share before we go?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thanks for the patience in the beginning and then the great questions along the way. I think uh, I think it's important that we always have at top of mind reliability and validity. Is it measuring what's intended to measure, and does it do it reliably? And how is that tied to whatever performance objective that we're trying to achieve? It's a list of performance objectives from a leader development program, or it's a deficit in performance that we've seen across the organization. It's great to evaluate what that intended purpose is, and the reliability and the validity for what the tool is used for. And again, great tools out there. We went through quite a few today. Even if they were higher in validity and reliability based on SAP standards for high stakes, sometimes it's not a high stakes thing you need to do. Maybe you need to just improve communication. Maybe you're just working on civility in the workplace. And so a lot of tools can be used for those to raise awareness and help people with communication. And so just focus on that, the check for the intended purpose tied to organizational goals. That would be my suggestion. Thanks again for letting me be here today.
All right. Thank you so much. Arlene, Pam, any final thoughts?
No, not for me.
None. Thank you.
Yep. And just one last thought for those. I see some new names. Thanks for joining us. We also have a community event on Thursdays. Just dropped the link for this week's event if you'd like to join us. It is not a speaker like this. It is just a free conversation for people in our community. So I invite you to come and join us.
And I would offer folks to reach out if there's any questions about this or the research behind it too. You can reach me at james@leaderei.com. That's also my website. If you want to look at the tools, I've got samples of those up there too. If you want to see some of the ones that we talked about today, sample reports. But please reach out. I'd be happy to help.
Thanks, James. And with that, I will we'll wrap this up. And I want to thank everyone for your time and wish you all a great evening and rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.